Welcome back to Let's Learn Git. No more excuses. Here in part five, we're going to start working with remote repositories, and that will lead to how to work with teams and collaborate online. So, most of the time when we say remote repositories, we're talking about GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket. It doesn't really matter what system we're talking about. It could even be a different computer you also own that's connected over the network that you can remote into. Now, I'm primarily going to be talking about GitHub because that's what I use for most things. So, if you're using one of the other systems, know that everything I'm talking about is also available over there, just with a little bit different flavor to it. They all use the same model provided by Git. Back in part one, I said one of the more important but harder to wrap your head around things is that everything in Git is local. Everything is local to that particular instance of Git. So if you were working on your repository in this picture, you would push things away from you to other machines and pull things into you from other machines. If we always think of the repo that we're in or we want to target from its point of view, then it makes the terminology make a lot more sense and we won't get confused with pull or push because it's very easy to push things away from your location and pull them into your location. But that's the idea. It doesn't really matter how many repositories we have out in the world. Git has this ability to track all the changes between them because of that wonderful hashing system. It all has the same history at the end of the day, and they know if the history is accurate, and it always knows, hey, am I in sync with the other repositories or are histories out of sync? That's a bad state. So the first thing we need to do is add a repository. Now, if you've been playing along at home with the other videos, you'll have made your own local repositories and have a nice healthy Git history. So let's go ahead and push that up onto the internet, or we can create a brand new repository on the command line. Now, GitHub, once you create a brand new repository on GitHub, well, it will just give you these directions. And it's pretty cool that it does that. So we can just copy paste depending on how we want to proceed. So for this example, I did the second one and I have added a remote origin. Now, origin is simply the name of the first remote instance of Git that we're going to have out on a server somewhere. So git remote add origin, and then that address simply adds that remote as origin. So if I type git remote, it simply says I have origin. If I did a git remote -b, it would show me the entire address. And then we're going to be able to push things from our local machine up to that online repository. So what we need to specifically say is git push, the name of the remote we're targeting, and then specifically what branch we want to push up. Now, we don't have to push master, we can push any of our branches, and we also don't have to push to origin. We can push to any other remote that we have. Again, there's no limit on remotes. Same way there's no limit on branches. We can have as many as we want. So we do need to be specific with Git and say which one to push. And most of the time you end up just pushing master to origin. So if you alias GPOM as git push origin master, it might save you a little bit of time in the long run. Now, GitHub's also cool because you can edit files. So if you notice a typo in something, you can just jump in the online editor, make your little quick change, and do a commit right there. But that creates the situation where you're no longer in sync with what's on your local machine. So to get those things in sync, we're simply going to pull those changes back down into our local environment. Now, if all we say is git pull, it will work assuming that you only have one remote, in this case origin, and one branch, when in this case master. So it's simply going to say, all right, I'm going to pull down the only thing I see. If you have multiple branches or if you have multiple remotes, you're going to need to specify, just like we did with git push, say origin master or origin branch name or other remote and branch name. And if we make changes locally, well, let's just use git push again to make those changes go up into the cloud. Now, one of the really cool things is if you're working on a project that already exists or you just want to get that code locally, you can do what's called a git clone. And that will make a copy of whatever it finds online, put it in any folder you name. In this case, I put this repo online into WP CLI demo folder, and then it sets up the remote for me and makes sure everything's in sync. So if I have access to that repository, in this case I do, I could simply make my changes and then do a git push origin master here, and it would simply push back up to that repository. But if I don't own that repository, well, that's when we're going to need to start using some online tools and start doing pull requests. So a pull request is simply us making a change on a repository we don't own. Now, in this case, I do own this repository, so I can commit directly to the master branch. If that's not there, what I would need to do is just that second one. That'd be the only option available, where I can create a new branch for this commit and start a pull request. So what is a pull request, you ask? Well, it is a branch and a merge on a repository we don't own, with a discussion in the middle of why we would want to do that to get approval to actually make that merge happen. And it's called a pull request because what you're doing is asking the repository owner to go ahead and pull that branch that we've made with our changes into the master branch to make that available to all of the other users. So very simple idea. Even a repo owner can make their own pull request so they can easily track over time, when did this code get merged? Why did we do that? And have other people sign off on it if you're on a team. This is very useful on large projects or complex projects, or if you just have a lot of developers or users you need to share that code with. It's one of the really cool superpowers about Git. Now, there are only a few commands that I've personally memorized, and that's what I've shared with you in this deck. For everything else, I tend to actually look up how to use it when I use it. And thank goodness there's tools like DuckDuckGo that make that very, very easy. So if I want to know how Git rebased works or Git stash, I simply will look it up right before I start using it. There's no shame in doing that. Everybody does that. And eventually you'll run into a situation where, oh yeah, I heard about this tool, or how do I do this in Git? And just look it up. There's a lot of documentation. Again, this is a wonderfully supported project in the world, and you're going to find what you're looking for pretty quick. So that's been it. Let's learn Git, no excuses. Hopefully I'll put you on a good path to learning all this stuff and working with Git every day. But that's really the only way you can learn this, is by using it every day and start getting those commands in your fingertips. You don't have to memorize the entire universe. Just remember, if you get stuck, Git fundamentally does a few things. It lets us move forward in time with a timeline where we can make commits and make messages on those commits of why we've made those changes. Move backwards in time to undo those changes if need be, and make parallel universes where we can make our changes and only merge in what works. If we do this on a repository we don't own, we'll have a short conversation online with something called a pull request. And that's basically it. Everything else you're going to look up, and there's a lot of other resources, including Git's manuals themselves, that will help you get unstuck. So please share this video, like it, and tell your friends. Thanks.